Hello guys, this is Mr. Friedhoff. I'm going to be giving you the lecture on cellular respiration. This is the chapter right after photosynthesis. The cool thing about photosynthesis and cellular respiration is they're kind of backwards reactions. The products of one are going to be the reactants of the next. So these are kind of like a coupled reaction. They work together, and we really need plants to survive on this earth. So what we're going to be looking at within cellular respiration is how energy is transferred from those glucose molecules we made in photosynthesis into ATP that our body can use. The big concept for this chapter is we don't use the energy directly from glucose. We have to first transfer it to ATP before we can use it. So the whole process here that we're going to talk about in the next few sections is getting that energy that we got from glucose and transferring it to ATP and making it usable energy. So cellular respiration, like I said, it is the process where we're going to break down organic molecules, specifically glucose, and we're going to break those down and get energy from those the bonds within glucose, and we're going to transfer that energy to make ATP. Our whole goal here is to make ATP. That's adenosine triphosphate. Remember, ATP has a lot of energy. There's three phosphate groups there. Between the last two bonds is where we hold the most potential energy. But once it breaks down, it's going to form ADP. Now, ATP is reusable. Again, once it's broken down to ADP, we just have to bond another phosphate group onto ADP to make it ATP. Now, there's a lot of words there, but we should understand ATP pretty well from the last chapter. We make about 36 to 38 ATP per glucose molecule. I'll explain why this is a roundabout number. We don't have a specific like, oh, it's this every time, because it's pretty intricate once you get down to the mitochondrial level here. So just understand that we're making about 38 ATP per glucose. On a test, I won't say like, hey, how much ATP do we make? 34, 38, or 30? Like, I'm going to say 2, 50, 100,000, 38. Like, you should be able to identify 38 ATP going forward. You can see the reaction here, the chemical reaction for cellular respiration. We're starting out with the glucose C6H12O6. We're adding in oxygen because, again, you breathe oxygen, you go through cellular respiration. You're going to produce carbon dioxide. We talked about that a little bit with climate change. Water, and yes, we do produce water in a pretty cool way, and energy in the form of ATP. Remember, oxidation is losing, so you can see this glucose is being oxidized because it's kind of losing these hydrogens. We don't technically, like, the hydrogens don't go away. They're going to be formed in water, but they do lose from this carbon molecule of glucose. And then you can see the oxygen here is being reduced. It's gaining those electrons. I just found this diagram this past year, and I absolutely love it. The only thing I don't like about it is that it is kind of grainy. I had to find this off of somebody else's PowerPoint, I feel like from like 10 years ago. But I love this image just because it gets you to understand how we have to transfer the energy we find in food to ATP. You can see this gear here that says food. This gear is going to drive the reaction and give energy to ATP, making it ADP, making it ATP. So we're energizing ADP by adding a phosphate group here, and we're making it ATP. So you can see the food here is what really is giving us our energy. Now, this ATP is going to go out and drive cellular processes. This is what's going to give all of our bodies, all of our cells, everything within our body energy to actually do work. So I love this image because it represents, again, the food being transferred, the energy in food to be transferred to ATP, and then ATP transferring that energy to other things to drive cellular processes. So again, one thing I want to go over before we get into the steps of cellular respiration is aerobic versus anaerobic. We should know these from your 9th and 10th grade biology classes. Aerobic just requires oxygen. Anaerobic doesn't require oxygen. We're going to see the difference between the two more on like day 3 of this chapter, but just understand that aerobic processes need oxygen. Think about the aerobic exercises you do in gym class. They need oxygen. You're breathing hard. Anaerobic, those are like the exercises you don't really need oxygen for. I'm not taking a shot at any sport, but like aerobic, like swimming is an aerobic exercise because you need a whole lot of oxygen when you're swimming. Anaerobic, that's like golf. Like, no offense to golf, I love golf, but it's not a very strenuous activity where you're going to need a lot of oxygen during that time. Our 4 steps in order, and yes, you got to know these, are glycolysis, prep step, citric acid cycle, and the electron transport chain. I probably after this will change the citric acid cycle to the Krebs cycle. You should know that those are interchangeable. Yes, there are a couple names for each one of these, just because Scientists like to name things like 8 things, but just understand that these are the processes in order, and you should know those by the end. The only one here that is anaerobic is glycolysis. We're going to see the prep step, the citric acid cycle, or the Krebs cycle, and the electron transport chain all be aerobic, which means they require oxygen. Now, we had NADPH back in photosynthesis, and we're going to come back and see NADH and FADH₂ molecules are just electron carriers. These guys are reusable. So imagine these are taxis that are going to deliver these electrons to the electron transport chain. I did make a TikTok on this, so if you want to check out my page, I did make a short video on what the whole rule with NADH and FADH₂ is within cellular respiration. But just understand that these guys are going to be carrying electrons and hydrogen ions to the electron transport chain. They're going to be very similar to the NADPH that we saw in the thylakoids within photosynthesis. Their rules are very, very similar. So don't get tripped up on the structure here. The structure really doesn't mean anything to us. I'm just showing you here that we're going to gain 2 electrons and hydrogens for FAD going to FADH₂ and NAD going to NADH. Again, and there's a long name. I think it's like nicotinamide adenosine dinucleotide or something like that. Don't get tripped up on this stuff. NAD is just an electron carrier. That's all you need to know. And just interestingly enough, if you want to look at the comparison between NADH and NADPH, the only difference is you add a phosphate group here. So we have some similar structures that are found in plants. And there, that shows evolutionary history that these processes evolved very early on. We just see an extra phosphate group there in NADPH.